This is MWIRE, Movie Week in Review. MWIRE is brought to you by Audible.com. Sign up today to get a free audiobook download at www.audibletrial.com/geekcastradio. Start today with a free 30-day trial with over 100,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Don't forget to follow Audible on Twitter at audible_com. And now the latest and greatest in movies with MWIRE.
For 35 years, a secret group has controlled the way you see movies.
There were clergy in the room.
These are moral censors.
They forced great filmmakers to change their art.
I was so devastated.
I got the call and they said NC-17. That's when my blood turned to ice water.
Because the studio won't release your movie.
No advertising budget. You can't run TV spots.
No one's ever found out who they are.
Who is controlling this thing and how are they controlling it?
No one knows. That's the whole point.
Until now.
We're actually hiring a private investigator to try to find out who these people are on the board.
It's time. The MPAA got a rating of its own.
The MPAA is that pinkish color building. There's absolutely no way of going in.
When an Oscar-nominated director
There's somebody.
and a private dick
So they're going to all start coming out. We'll take some plates. That's the camera. It looks just like a little butt.
dig deep,
Oh, a lot of women. We need to go for this.
I'm gonna put on my safety belt.
He's not even looking. I got him. Right there. Got a raider.
to expose Hollywood's dirtiest secrets.
Whoa! One woman is topless, breast exposed. So what I don't understand is who's counted the Do you ever do interviews at all?
No.
I'm already divulging a lot here. At some point, I think I have to draw a line.
For seeing my pubic hair, we get an NC-17.
Violence is fine. Sex isn't.
You almost got us caught. They were going, look at that man. Is he filming us?
Discover the movie
You are dealing with a very powerful censorship group.
Hollywood doesn't want you to see.
I'm going to say the F word. It's the fascist system.
Hi, is this the MPAA? Yes. I'd like to submit my film for a rating. It's a documentary. It's about how films are rated.
This September, censorship gets fucked.
Hello and welcome to MWIRE Movie Week in Review. I am your host, TFG1Mike, and joining me is MovieRevolt Dan. Hello, sir.
How's it going?
It's going. And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the special episode called Rating Pending. It was probably, I think it was after I watched the film that we're going to be talking about this time around. I think it was after you introduced me to it. And I'm like, that's easy. Instead of having a numbered episode, I can just call it Rating Pending, considering the subject matter we'll be talking about here. So, 2014, we ended with episode 115 on Guardians of the Galaxy. This year, in 2015, MWIRE is going to have an explosion of content. Not exactly Michael Bay proportions of explosions, but the podcast is coming back stronger than ever. My goal for MWIRE by New Year's Eve of 2015 is that we at least get to episode 175. It's a very, very lengthy and tasking goal, but that's the plan. I don't know if it's going to happen like that, but that's the plan. Coming up, you're going to hear various episodes. The goal now with Movie Week in Review is to hit movies from almost all generations. I may, say to Dan or Kevin or Steve, or I may bring in some outsiders that want to do the horror genre, since that's not my thing. I don't want to say that the podcast will hit all film genres, because it won't. But the goal now is with the podcast is to kind of give you guys a variety of tastes. Like, just for an example here, we will be covering over the next few months or so. Episode 116 will be Paycheck with Ben Affleck and Uma Thurman. Episode 117 will be An Affair to Remember. Episode 118 will be The Man in the Iron Mask. Episode 119 will be Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, starring Jason Scott Lee, I think. I think that was what his name was. Episode 120 will be The Expendables. And so you can see, folks, that I'm going for a wide variety of different films to pique everyone's interest, not just the whole geek side of it. What have you been up to in your film watching, sir?
Well, a little bit of catching up with stuff I missed in 2014. Recently watched Wild, which was nominated for 2 Oscars for leading performance for Reese Witherspoon, and Laura Dern got a supporting. I liked it. It was by the same guy who did Dallas Buyers Club, and it's a little indulgent, but it's enjoyable. And also enjoyed watching. I saw American Sniper as well, which was like killing it in the box office in January, setting up records, and I overall like that too. It's probably Clint Eastwood's best movie since Gran Torino. It has issues, definitely. It's a little thin overall, but Bradley Cooper.
For a second there, I thought you were going to say it's probably his best film since $1 Million Baby.
I would say I think it's a better movie than $1 Million Baby. $1 Million Baby is okay. It's a little bit. It gets the family dynamic in that is pretty awful. Similar with American Sniper. I just I mentioned. I feel like Clint Eastwood doesn't know human emotion all that well. He doesn't know how to portray it on screen. So when it comes to
well, he was Dirty Harry, so I mean, there's no emotion when it comes to that.
Yeah, he's a very dry fellow. So when he tries to evoke it on screen through actors, it doesn't always work, especially when it comes to relationships. But I mean, Bradley Cooper is pretty phenomenal in that. I think it's probably the best performance he's done. He really loses all of his Bradley Cooper-ness and gets into the role.
Yeah, I mean, he is one of those actors that really surprises me what he does these days.
Yeah,
because for me, the first time I ever saw him or ever knew him was as Gardner's Sydney Bristow's Will, her best friend on Alias. That's the first time I ever saw him in anything.
Yeah,
was the TV series Alias, and I've seen, people can hate it if they want to. I thought he played a pretty good updated version of Faceman in the A-Team, regardless of how horrible that movie may be to some people. I thought he did a pretty good damn job as Face, and then I saw him in Limitless. He's a very versatile and very different actor. I don't think he's not one of those actors that just goes for where the money is. He picks his roles very, very well.
Yeah, he's been being more proactive, working with better directors. Especially with David R. Russell, because he did American Hustle and Silver Linings Playbook with them. It's kind of odd because this is the 3rd year in a row he's been nominated for Best Actor, which is it's a rare company that he's in. So I don't think he's I wouldn't put him on the top echelon of actors today, but I do think he's getting better and better, and like you said, he's picking better roles than just being the douchebag that was in Wedding Crashers or something like that. So he's really good in that role. He can make you hate him very easily, but every so often he'll do a Hangover 3 here and there. But all actors do that, So.
Please tell me that franchise is dead. Please tell me there's not going to be a 4th Hangover.
I think it's good and dead because the 3rd one did not do very well. So I think they realized, okay, this cash cow is no longer viable.
And for me, I've been watching a whole bunch of movies that I haven't seen in a long time, or movies I've never seen, such as An Affair to Remember and stuff like that. I even have, I want to eventually try, and I know a lot of people will be happy about this, I want to eventually try to see Bullet, because I've never seen that movie. I've heard a whole bunch about it, but I've never actually seen it. But this time around in this kind of special MWIRE, we're actually going to be talking about a super secret society that Hollywood keeps very well hidden.
Yes.
Because in 2006, Kirby Dick went ahead and made a film called This Film Is Not Yet Rated. It's a documentary all about the Motion Picture Association of America and the secret society that they are.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much an inside look to the process of how the MPAA gives ratings out and how a film gets a certain rating. And it's a great documentary, but it's a weird ass process that they go through.
Yeah, it's you see especially to the inconsistency with the process, especially when there's a good deal of talking heads in this. You kind of need that to get a better background. And you have everyone from Kevin Smith to Trey Stone and Matt Parker to other independent filmmakers, and you see just how a scene in one film that's more independent, doesn't have this massive studio behind it, will be rated like too gratuitous to be a rated R, but that similar scene in something like American Pie will be fine because it's it's a studio film. So there was some there are a lot of questionable practices that they do when making these ratings. Sometimes you realize just how it could just be a random crapshoot depending the difference between getting an NC-17 rating and an R rating. So.
I mean, I see the rating system now, not just for films, but also for for video games. On the video game side of it, they say what exactly they say what the rating is, whether it's E for everyone or M for mature, and then under it they give you a reason why, over extensive cartoon violence or blood, guts, and gore or whatever else, and all is the MPAA. Half of the ratings, when I see what a film is rated, it just says, oh, well, it's rated R for this, this, and this, or, and they have, it's the standard terms, sexual situations, or adult language, or, they have the whole thing now on TV where it's like, TV 14, DLSV, and this, that, and everything else, but it always really surprises me when the MPAA is in the news or anything like that, because it's like, who are these people? I mean, that's what I wanted to learn from watching this thing. And, come to find out that most of them are just everyday people, right?
It's a combination of that's kind of the odd thing about the MPAA is I think a lot of people think it's like a government organization or something of that nature, but it's not. It's an independent organization. That is run by and founded by most of the major movie chains that they put together and make the decision. That's why you see more leniency towards more studio projects, because those are the people that are making the system up. Basically, they stepped in to get it kind of around that, because before, like, you had the rated R's, the rated rated PG-13. Before this rating system, you had, well, when movies first started, you really had nothing, and then you had the the ultimate censorship. You had like complete censorship, where you had to bring your movie to this board, and they would decide if it can go, be made or not. Like, there wasn't necessarily a rating, but like anything that was objectable got rejected, and you couldn't use that in your movie. Then they kind of moved to this more rating system. So
I remember as a kid, the rating system in the 80s was G, PG, R, NC-17, and X.
Yeah, and then PG-13 came out. I think the first film that ever really, one of the first films, major releases, was Red Dawn. That was like one of the most notable ones that had the PG-13 rating, and a lot of it was due to movies like Gremlins and Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom that weren't necessarily R, but because it had no nudity or anything like that. But PG was a little bit, parent guidance. They weren't quite that as well when you have someone like literally tearing the heart out of somebody. So PG-13 was founded to kind of be that middle ground, and some people have said that's done a lot of negative things, because now you will have a lot of comedies that will soften and be a little bit more PC to get the PG-13 rating rather than the R, because getting a PG-13 rating, you have a bigger audience, and you're going to potentially make more money compared to an R-rated film, which tends to be, they tend to make less, and it's harder for, people to go see them.
Yeah. You recently put out your top 100 most anticipated films of 2015.
That I did.
And you had put on one of them that I forget which film it was for. You'll remind me once I say this, but you put on one of them about how the 80s is the decade where we're all kind of like, hey, franchise movies this and franchise movies that, and this is where everyone has the nostalgia and everything else. And the funny thing is about that is that I remember a lot, and I've said this before on the podcast. I mean, MWIRE's almost 6.5 years old now. Well, it's 5.5, almost 6 years old now. And it's one of those things where I've said on the podcast before, my mom let me watch anything. I mean, 7, 8, 9 years old. I remember late 88, early 89. I remember watching Beverly Hills Cop 2, which came out in 87. And that is clearly rated R, obviously. But it's one of those things where nowadays, I would say I had this feeling more around 2006 to 2009. But it's like those 3 years, everything was PG-13. Every single movie that obviously outside of like animated films or any of that kind of stuff, I'm talking about like things like a Beverly Hills Cop 2 or things like a Terminator 2 or whatever it is. It's like everything nowadays, it seems like it's all PG-13. And I only noticed recently the rated R films kind of bringing it back. I mean, in that 3-year time period, I can only think of any film I had seen on TV for a trailer or whatever else that was rated R. It was a horror movie. I mean,
the rated R comedy certainly went away. They're making comebacks here and there. You'll have ones like this the end, and some of the Seth Rogen ones, and 22 Jump Street 2. I think that's actually, I'm not sure what that's rated, but yeah, like you rarely see PG anymore unless it's a cartoon. It's usually PG-13 or R. And then, like, the limits of PG-13 are certainly being tested by a lot of people, especially someone like Nolan. I know a lot of people mentioned with, like, The Dark Knight that there's a lot of violence in that, but there's not much blood, which kind of gets into with what they're talking about, where, you can show a lot of people dying and getting shot up, but if there's no blood, it's okay, so it's PG-13, but if there's blood, it's R, which you think, I don't know if that should be the determining factor, but you're right, most people are going towards PG-13, and R's a rarity. It's weird too because I remember in 2010 there was the movie The King's Speech, which was ended up being rated R because they said the F word. And there's like really nothing objectionable in that movie whatsoever. It's this British drama about a king, one of the past kings. And there's like nothing really objectionable, but they say the F word, so it's rated R. And there was a kind of a to-do about that because it's a type of movie you may want to show in your history class because it goes over, but you can't show an R-rated movie in history class. So they ended up re-releasing it with a PG-13 rating, just removing that. But if you watch something like The King's Speech and compare it to something like, I don't know, The Expendables 3 just came out this year, which is PG-13. I would say which one's more objectable? Which one do you want a 13-year-old to watch? I would say there's probably a little bit more questionable things in Expendables 3 than there is in The King's Speech, but it is that F word that changes it. So you realize kind of like it's a very objective type of thing to do, which makes this entire process that more that the entire process a little bit more questionable because, like you said, you don't really know a lot behind what got that PG-13 rating or that R rating. It could be pretty much anything.
Right. And Kirby Dick's film here, this film is not yet rated, it pretty much points out with itself, with the documentary itself, it pretty much points out that, with the use of, the F word or showing sexual situations, the documentary almost got an NC-17 rating. The first draft of it, or the first cut of it that they sent the MPAA did.
Yeah.
And they had to cut that back to get whatever it is. I assume it's rated R now.
It's not rated anything.
Oh.
Yeah, that's...
Well...
And that's the thing, too.
And that's the other thing, too. Yeah, go ahead.
Is that, people are like, well, why do you have to get it rated? Well, if you want it released in theaters, you need it to be related. You need it for it to be rated because the MPAA is run by the theater industry. So if they don't rate it, they won't play it. So you're kind of stuck. Luckily he had a documentary, so there's other ways around that. But yeah, it is. Right. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it is really nuts, and I don't understand. Like, okay, I've said this before on many podcasts that I've done in the length of time that I've podcasted. For me, if it personally does not affect me who Tom Cruise is getting married to or getting divorced from or who's having a child. I don't care about what he does in his personal life. I mean, unless the guy isn't doing, criminal acts, and even then, it doesn't really bother me that much, as long as he gives me the next great Mission Impossible movie, or whatever movie he's going to be. You know what I mean? It's like, I care about the body of work. I don't care about the actor's personal life. But at the same time, it's like, I still want to know who the hell these people think they are that are in this society to rate these films.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think in the documentary he says that, some of them are just, like I said, everyday people, like teachers and you get the church involved, and of course, you got clergymen or pastors or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
Whatever church that they have in there. But it just, when I watch this, it boggles my mind how secretive, because they used a private investigator throughout this entire thing to try to try to hunt some of these people down, and I'm like, wow, really?
Well, it is. I mean, it is like really close knit. That's the thing too. Yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the most interesting things about the documentary is that it not only does it get into what's wrong with it, it tries to figure out what exactly, who
it is.
What it is and who these people are, and kind of like how they've lied in a lot of ways, where they've said like people are only on this board for a limited amount of time, and and they're supposed to be people who have kids of a certain age, and how that's not necessarily always true, and it's there's a lot of secrecy behind it, because I think there's not nearly as much thought put into it as filmmakers would probably like there to be. They seem to just put out whatever. Like there's a good section with the creators of South Park,
Trey Parker and
Mark Stone, who talk about how they knew that their film was going to be ejectable. So what they did was, when they made something like Team America World Police, they put in horrible scenes they knew would get cut, and they had no desire of actually using them, but they just wanted them to focus on those so they could actually use the things that they wanted to. So you have to play these little games to kind of get what you want, just because they're going to focus in on weird things, and how kind of the hypocrisy regarding like male sexuality compared to female sexuality, and how it's like one's judged a lot harsher than the other. So it's weird that it's so there's no transparency whatsoever. So it's good for a documentary like that kind of goes after it and tries to figure it out. And
absolutely. After you had watched this, did you come away learning anything?
I think mostly from finding out who the people were, that was kind of interesting, but I don't think that's the most impactful part. Most of it, what you learn, I think the best part of it is probably from the filmmakers themselves, and explaining how odd it is, and how I keep going back to Trey Parker and Matt Stone, but I think they're a good example, because they did something like Orgasmo, which was an independent film, and they did something like South Park and Team America, which was a studio film, and they explained the differences in how doing independent films, they're like, okay, it's NC-17, but they won't tell you why. But then when it comes to a studio film, they're like, well, remove this, and this, and then you're good. So it is, I don't know if there's just less, there's what you're seeing, though. I'd be interested in kind of seeing a sequel to this, because I think a lot has changed in 5 years, especially with the increase of stuff like Netflix, streaming, and on demand, that you don't need the studio system nearly as much as you used to. A lot of people are releasing films on demand now over getting them released in theaters, and they're doing well. I mean, obviously you had the huge above with The Interview that happened this year. That ended up making a good amount, not nearly as much as it would in the theater, but before that, this past summer, you had something like Snowpiercer, which did really well too. So a lot of the issues that people had getting their films released because of ratings in the MPAA, they're no longer really a factor in some ways, because you can kind of go around them. So in a way, they're losing their power in that instance. But still, people want their stuff released in theater. So I think that's the thing I learned about just how tight knit this group is, and how impossible it is to kind of get around. So,
the one thing I wish I would have learned from this is how to join the damn thing. No, I'm serious. No, I don't. But I'm saying like. Okay, sure. They showed in the documentary that some of these people are teachers or people that have relations to the church, or some of them might be Hollywood producers or directors or studio heads or whatever else. But how what's the process? How does a teacher mother of three from BFE Kentucky get in, yet a teacher and a father of two from California? What's that whole process of how they choose who is on there? That's what I kind of would have liked to learn a little bit more about. Not necessarily the personal lives of these people, but the workings of their application process. And
yeah, that definitely would be interesting.
And like you said, how long? Like, okay, say guy over here is accepted. Is there a certain term? Is it like the presidency? Is it like no, I'm serious.
No,
I mean, it might sound funny, but I'm being serious. Is there a certain, like, once you're approved, does your application have an expiration date saying that you can only serve for this, and this?
Well, they do mention that in the documentary, that there is supposed to be a term limit, but the issue is that people aren't necessarily following that. And I mean, and that's kind of that's a good point, though. It's like, how do you get into this MPAA, this rating board to begin with? And again, that's an issue that's really not been released and still really hasn't been. So it's just, I don't know what they do. If it's just people that it's something like the Nielsen ratings, right? It's like, how does someone get a Nielsen's box? I guess, I don't know. Do you get a phone call one day and it's like, hey, it's MPAA, we want you to join? I don't know. That's a good question.
The Nielsen's thing is a whole other topic for another podcast entirely.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of it's interesting though, because there's similarities between the two. So.
Oh, absolutely, and it's funny you mention that, because by the time this goes up, it might be a few months ago, when Last Man Standing had its episode Helen Potts. And Patricia, what's her name? Patricia Richardson came back and played Tim's character's neighbor. They go back and forth. Oh yeah, it was on for 8 long, the other show and whatever else was on 8 long years, and yeah, but we had great neighbors, the Nielsens. It's just so many just different, those things. But yeah, the Nielsen ratings, that's something we can cover on Remote Control or Telecast or whatever else, but that would be an interesting thing to find out, because I believe we were, at the time back in the 80s, I think we were a Nielsen household with my house, because I remember us getting envelopes of cash. They just send us.
That's what they told you. Yeah, we get Nielsen ratings, envelopes of cash. That seems a little bit.
Well, but what I'm saying is, like, I've I remember as a kid, getting the mail and seeing something that said Nielsen's board or whatever it was that it said, and my mom opened it and there would be like anywhere from $10 to $25 in there in cash, and I'm like, who does this? And that's all that was in there was the cash. There was no notice, no nothing. It was just the money, and it's like, okay, then that works.
All that they deal in cash, you think they would at least go check, but I don't know. I guess there's less paper trail.
Yeah, less way to track them down in this day and age. Yeah. What was the very first rated R movie you ever saw?
Oh wow. Is Terminator 2 rated R? Maybe, actually, probably The Predator. I'm thinking the original Predator. That might have been the first rated R film I watched.
For me, it's probably it would had to have been probably the most one I can remember as a kid would probably be Beverly Hills Cop 2, but I know I'd seen a bunch of rated R films.
See, my family was like the opposite of yours. Like, my parents are very strict on what I was allowed to watch. I couldn't really watch anything. I remember trying to watch like Kindergarten Cop, and it was like PG. So that would became an issue. So yeah, but I had an older brother who would, rent movies from the back when they had, Blockbuster and things like that. We would rent them, and we shared a room, so I'd end up watching them. And I remember watching Predator and being like completely freaked out in one of the early scenes where you see the people like skinned alive. So I don't know if that was technically the first one I watched, but it's the one I remember the most. Maybe RoboCop's probably up there too, and. It's funny when you think about like how many R-rated movies had cartoons made out of them in the 80s, but there were a few. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you brought up RoboCop because we live in such a day and an age where everything is PG-13. A few years ago, I went back and I went to watch RoboCop, and I'm like, oh my god, this movie is way too damn... Like, I didn't remember. I mean, I was probably 91, 92 when I first saw that movie, so I was 11 or 12, and I did not remember that movie being that violent.
Yeah, I mean,
especially with Ed 209 and whatever else, and it's like, oh my god, what is this rated? And I look at, like, oh my god, it's rated R. Holy crap, what the hell?
Yeah, I mean, it was very much in that time, and very much a reflection of just the gratuitous violence of action films during that period. And it did a good job of like satirizing just how ridiculous they were getting, because you realize like the 80s had some really brutal action films, like really over the top violence, which you don't nearly get as much today. Most of it's a little bit, like we mentioned, like PG-13. So stuff like the Bourne franchise, and the violence is limited. It's brutal, but not necessarily with body parts getting blown up and stuff like that. You get that. I mean, that's why you have the Expendables, right?
Franchise is not as violent as it used to be.
No, it's been. I think you kind of reached the apex of that, and then it started kind of going down to the 90s with stuff. I think Die Hard kind of changed the game a little bit, and then you had more stuff like Speed, and then The Matrix came around, and it's you've seen a different evolution, and when it comes to action. So I mean, it could always go back to that. It does kind of. It is, cyclical in that response. Usually, when it comes to trends in movies, so you could always go back to that in some way. I know. Schwarzenegger and Stallone are trying to bring that style back, but not having much luck.
Well, I know you don't care for the third installment, but I mean, the overall franchise for me personally, The Expendables, is it's them reliving the glory days, and it's, all of those different stars coming together. Like, you could not have done that in the 80s. You could not have had a movie like The Expendables 1 and 2 in the 80s. And it's now, because again, we live in a generation, or we live, as people of the 80s, we remember all that stuff, and we always want... I don't think anyone that I know of, maybe outside of you or somebody else, but it's one of those things where I don't think anybody I knew in the 80s that wouldn't have wanted to see Stallone, Willis.
Yeah, I would love to see it in the 80s.
All in one film. And I think The Expendables really capture that. And sure, the stories, you can nitpick the stories and the plots and whatever else, but it's like the scenes where they get to, all be in a room and fighting the bad guys together. I mean, everybody versus Jean-Claude Van Damme. Come on now. That was pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That actually just isn't... I find it tiresome. I'd rather watch, give me options between Expendables 3 or the Raid 2. I'm going to probably go with the Raid 2. I don't know. It just the action in those films get a little bit repetitive. But anyways, it's kind of interesting, though, kind of getting back to the documentary, that it has had some effect on the MPAA. Not a large part. I mean, a lot of it's still the way it is. But one of the big talking points in this was how films weren't able to compare each other, like compare themselves to other films that had the same rating, or say, hey, this, and you're saying I can't be PG-13 because of this, but hey, this movie has the same thing and it's rated PG-13. But they did change that practice in 2007. I don't know if it's because of this. Maybe there was a lot of pressure to do that, but I think that's at least one good thing, where they are allowing movies to compare themselves to other movies, get good ratings. They're getting the proper ratings. But it is interesting when you see certain films rated certain things. Like, I think a big one, like we mentioned, is The Dark Knight, where it's like you could rate that R, and I could understand why, because there's a lot of you have the pencil scene, and the Joker himself, he does a lot of really intense, violent acts, but it always cuts away at the right moment. So I don't know, to me, that is just as violent as seeing someone get blown up a little bit, because your imagination's left to kind of fill in the blanks, which can be even more traumatic for a kid. I guess it depends on the kid, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And we back in the 90s, we lived in an age where we had something, and I by no means am saying this movie is any good. Hell, I don't even think I've ever seen it. It's so horrible. But there's two different versions at the time of Showgirls in 95. There's an NC-17 version and an R version. I'm like, wait, how the hell can that happen? And then I look at stuff today. there's the regular theatrical version, and then there's an uncut version that comes out later, and I'm like, and I don't mean, director's cut is, I see the director's cut stuff a little differently. Like if you take Daredevil, and I know people will be like, yes, please take Daredevil away. But if you take 2003's Daredevil, you look at the theatrical cut and you look at the director's cut, it's a completely different aspect of story. It's it's the same film, but they add a few scenes here and there, whatever else. But you look at, I see advertisements for everything nowadays where it's like, oh, this movie just came out in DVD or Blu-ray or whatever, and then 3 months later, oh, hey, here's the uncut version of the same movie, and I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah, you get that a lot where it's like, especially with comedies where it's like the unrated version. I remember American Pie, I think, was one of the big proponents to begin with, where they always had their unrated version, which they had scenes that were specifically made that they knew would not make it into the movie, but would make it into the DVD. And yeah, I mean, director's cut's a little bit different because it doesn't necessarily mean that it's more gratuitous or you have more shocking images. It just could be that the entire frame of the film is different. Because Ridley Scott's probably the most infamous directors who, like Blade Runner has like 6 different cuts to it that changes a lot of things, like Aliens franchise too. So you do see that. Like director's cut's a little bit different. The director's cut could also have the same rating, but unrated versions usually to me it's just more of a marketing ploy to get more attention. So
absolutely. Well, this kind of goes to what you were just saying about they may have cut some stuff out or they may have shot scenes for this specific thing. I remember specifically when it comes to animated films, the only film I know that has a edited version and an original uncut version is Batman Beyond Return of the Joker, because they had to edit it they had to use the edited version for showing it on TV. But it's 2 very different ways that the Joker dies. In the edited version everyone sees, he slips in a puddle of water, throws the switch, and electrocutes himself. In the original uncut version, Tim Drake shoots him. So it's one of those things where you just never know what's going to happen with what. And with this documentary, I really, really enjoyed watching it. I really liked having the knowledge of some of the stuff that goes through the MPAA. And it's one of those things where it was a very interesting thing. Like, I wasn't sure what to expect out of this. So we're going to take a quick break, folks. We'll be back after this.
Now for a behind-the-scenes look at Geekcast Radio Network's newest show, Talking in Circles.
So, Chuck, Greg, what are you guys thinking for this week's show?
Well, Dan, how about we just talk about the things that we've read or watched this week?
We do reviews like that every week, Chuck. How about a game like Fact or Fiction or The Power of Names?
Those are great, and we're always coming up with new ideas for games. And how about some top 5s? You know how I love my top 5s.
What about tournament-style brackets, or sequel, reboot, and destroy, who will win in a fight, taking it too far, crazy but true news, or...
Yes, it appears we have lots of things to work on.
Listen to Talking in Circles, taking timeless topics in new directions, every Tuesday on iTunes or GeekCastRadio.com, the Geekcast Radio Network.
Hey, Dan, who's the guy with the creepy voice?
So as I said before the break, folks, I wasn't sure what to expect out of the documentary, but after watching it, I, got a little bit more information. Looking back on the documentary now, it feels like one of those real-life crime programs I watch on Investigation Discovery, where it's like, hey, go follow this guy, or go... It's so strange. Did the documentary... Did it exceed any expectations you might have, or is there anything about it that you didn't like, or?
I don't think there's necessarily things that was really all that concerning or anything I didn't like. I heard a lot about it before I ended up watching it. Because I heard a lot of the issues with the MPAA before it came out, and they kind of just took them all and put them into one documentary. I mean, I think what I like about it is it takes the typical talking heads format, and you mentioned like the true crime aspect, but I think that's important to make it more than just people complaining. I think it adds a little bit and gets into it's more of an investigation piece to find out well, what is the story behind all these other stories? So I did like that. So it does feel like a movie that is a little self-important at times. It's definitely like the director is out to prove something, but at the end, I don't know what we learn a lot. For those who aren't aware, we get information, but does it really come up with a solution to it or anything like that, or an alternative, or is there an alternative? Maybe there isn't. So maybe that's the only one negative. But no, I got exactly kind of what I expected, and I do think the best parts of it are just the stories from the different filmmakers and getting that firsthand look into that process. Because I do enjoy learning about that, because it's a part of the movie business you don't really hear about a lot, and it's interesting when you think about it, where it's like you've spent all that time and effort making this movie, and then some guy you don't even know has ultimate authority over what happens to your film. So it's a weird system in that way. So, but I don't know.
Yeah, it is very weird, because like you said, if you put 4, 5, 6 months, 1-2 years worth of work into a film, you then have to send it off to get rated. Yeah. Kind of like how you send stuff off to get graded, like comics or toys. It's like, obviously with the grading system, that's more to figure out the actual value of a comic or a toy, but it's similar to that. And it's like, okay, I've done all this work on this thing. I'm going to send it off and not know what they're going to nitpick at, or not know what they're going to find offensive. And it's the I know it's to get the ratings for the films to have them shown in theaters, but it really feels like all as the MPAA is a giant organization for film screenings. It's really
well. I mean, I think the main purpose of the MPAA is to design something so the government doesn't get involved. I think that's the idea, is true. Like to keep it away, like so the movie theaters have more control. That's kind of that's why they're a little bit more. That's why they're kind of particular over the entire process, I think, because they want to be able to control it themselves, and they don't want to give up that control. And I think there's actually kind of to find out like what it was like before the MPAA. There's actually a really good scene in a Scorsese film called The Aviator, where you have Howard Hughes kind of trying to release one of his films that he directed, and they're kind of going over the poster, and they're objectifying the poster and trying to say what's wrong with it, and he has to spiel about it and trying to kind of defend his poster and his movie. And it's really interesting just to see, because that is literally a board of people that were standing there, and it was him, and they were just kind of discussing it, and like seeing that system compared to this, and they're both problematic in their own ways, but it's just kind of crazy when you realize that. And the only real difference that's really occurred is that we now have ratings, and now that those people that are in those chairs are not seen. So it's kind of crazy. But I don't know.
It is absolutely crazy. Is there anything else you want to talk about on this before we get out of here?
No, I mean, I would say if you watch this and you enjoy it, there's the director did a documentary after this called The Invisible War, which is completely different. It's about kind of rape that happens in the military that goes unnoticed. It's a very heavy documentary, but it's quite good. I would recommend that. I think that is still streaming on Netflix. I know as of this record, this film is not yet rated. It's currently not streaming, but check back here and there, and it's usually on. It comes off and goes on every so often. So,
it might be on iTunes or Amazon Prime or something like that.
I know it's on iTunes. It's on Amazon Prime, but not for free streaming. But you can rent it.
Well, right, yeah, that's what I'm saying. All right, folks. That's going to do it for us here on this edition of MWIRE. As I said at the beginning of the podcast, coming up next is episode 116, which is Ben Affleck and Uma Thurman in Paycheck, along with Aaron Eckhart, Mr. Two-Face himself. Interesting seeing him outside of the Harvey Dent persona. So that's going to do it for us. Where can people interact with you online, sir?
Well, I'm on Twitter at MovieRevolt, and you can find all my stuff at Geekcast Radio.
All right. You can also check out Dan's podcast on Geekcast Radio every Tuesday called Talking in Circles. So keep those film reels rolling, and we'll catch you next time.
You've just listened to Movie Week in Review on GeekCastRadio.com. If you would like to leave feedback on the show, there are many ways to do so. First, you can visit the website, GeekCastRadio.com, where you can comment on the episode and all of our different podcasts. Be sure to rate our show on iTunes and leave us feedback. You can follow us on Twitter at GCRN MWIRE. Become a fan of us on Facebook by searching Geekcast Radio Network. You can email us at feedback@geekcastradio.com. Call the voicemail line 502-526-5821. Please remember to tell us the show you're leaving the message for and your name. So until next time, unleash the geek in you.
In a world, there, I said it, happy,